All right, hi everybody. I'm Teele. I am an assistant professor at Penn. This is a project that's trying to understand the barriers to political promotion faced by women. It's joint with my advisor from Yale, Frances Rosenbluth, Rachel Silbermann, who was a graduate student with me, and also Josh Kalla, who was an undergraduate when I taught graduate methods. So I claim responsibility for him. He's gone on to great fame as a graduate student at Berkeley. So the main question that animates this and much of Frances, Rachel, and my substantive research agenda is, why are there so few women in politics? Lots of positive changes have happened since the 1980s. So after the second wave of feminism in the 70s kind of coalesced and took off, you've got rising numbers of women in national governments all over the world. But this number has plateaued at around 25%. Even countries that have quotas tend to try to get about a third of the candidates or a third of the seats registered for women. And so you see that basically we haven't made much progress in 15 years. The number has held fairly steady. The lack of women in politics is puzzling because women are successful legislators, so they often have a greater share of their policies passed than men. They're also considered by voters to be efficient, stable, and vivacious in office. They win re-election at high rates. They win open contests at very high rates, but they also win re-election at very high rates. And Alex Fornace and I have a paper where we show that, in fact, there's a relative incumbency advantage that women have in the United States in state and national government, as well as in local government in the UK. So reasons that we might think that there are too few women or not parity in politics is that women don't want to run for office. So there's some sort of self-selection bias. They lack political interest, they lack political efficacy, etc. The thing is, in countries that have implemented a zipper quota, so 50-50, where every single candidate has to be alternating men and women, you get parity. So we think that this sort of self-selection bias isn't the full story. Instead, we think that there's something about gendered conceptions of candidate viability which limits women's advancement. So when I give this paper to a room of the women in politics scholars, I don't have to go into very much depth about what a gendered perception is. Here, I'm not going to have to tell you guys about what conjoints are, so I'm going to take a little bit of a minute to talk about this. We know from various countries that there are different models of candidacy. So there's kind of a male model where, in many countries in the United States especially, the pathway to office is through a career in law or through kind of lower level political positions. And the kind of trope in the gender and politics literature is that a man looks in the mirror and he sees a future senator, whereas a woman gets involved in politics for specific issues, okay? So she doesn't see herself as a career legislator, but has something that she wants to change in her community. And we see this in the fact that the greatest single feeder career for female politicians is teaching in the United States. That's been constant for more than 30 years. And men are much more likely to have these lower level of political experience as jumping off points for higher office. So these different paths that exist have caused people in the gender and politics literature to say, hey, look, more women can run for office, okay? Women have these qualifications. Teaching is a big female career. Teachers are the people who are actually attaining political office, so here's this information, you can actually run. The problem with this, I'm all for that, but one of the problems, I think, with just expressing that more women can run is that there's something about cues and about what we think of when we think of a politician that may be influencing voters and gatekeepers, other leaders' choices that they're making about who to promote for higher level office, party leaders, executive positions, etc. That's influencing or that's driving this sort of 25% plateau. So it's hard to discern preferences from surveys. We know about social desirability bias. So what we want to do is use a conjoint experiment to help unpack the marginal contributions of different attributes that are correlated with gender to candidate selection. So the conjoint experiment invokes gendered pathways. So I'm going to tell you what that means. But basically, we ask these forced pair questions. Everybody's familiar with it. We fully randomize over a set of characteristics. We fully randomize the order in which the characteristics are presented. And we ask about, spouse's occupation, the number of years in politics, the current occupation of the person who's running. This is gender. Actually, it's candidate sex. I'm going to explain that in a minute. Age and the number of children. Okay, so what's a gendered pathway? We use the word gender sometimes to substitute for sex, like biological sex. I think it sounds more scientific, perhaps, or more neutral, or just more polite, or something like that. But gender, in fact, we talk about it as being a constellation of characteristics that provide a cue about that person's gender. So if somebody is a nurse, if I say, think of a nurse, right? You have an image in your mind. That person has a certain, outfit, certain voice, etc. Also, certain sex comes to mind when you think of a nurse, at least in this country. And so what we think is that there are these characteristics that are related to a cue about gender that are not just candidate sex. So number of years in politics, maybe that current occupation we think is going to be another one of those cues. The age. So women in politics, women who enter politics tend to be older on average than men when they enter politics. And so female politicians also are older. Also, female politicians tend to not have children. Okay, they are more likely to be unkidded. So these things we think are informing the constellation of characteristics that cue the candidate gender. Anyway, so what we do is we look at the most common pathways, the most common male and female pathways, and we use those attributes in these conjoint experiments. We have three samples. We have three samples that we enumerate these questions to. A survey of global legislators that was fielded in July 2014. So I compiled a database of 9,000 national leaders in, I think, 26 countries. We translated the survey into many different languages. 4% response rate there, 431 legislators overall. A survey of American leaders, so I think the database was 21,000 emails that were sent. About 1,800 responded, so a higher response rate, 8.6%. That's definitely higher for lower level positions in the United States than for higher level positions. And then we have a survey of American voters. This is a population survey. This was fielded by TESS in December 2014, and so that's 2,100 voters. In our analyses, we ask each respondent to rank 3 pairs of candidate, and we investigate responses for each sample, for women and men, for female and male respondents, and also based on partisan affiliation. The standard errors are clustered at the respondent level. I'm only going to show you one set of results because they're surprisingly consistent across these very different groupings. So here we have the Global Legislator Survey, the US Legislator Survey, and the USA Population Survey. And here, again it says gender, it's supposed to say sex, we have male or female. And what really was striking for us is that candidates that are female do not seem to be incurring any penalty based on sex alone. Okay? So it's not sex-based discrimination as such that we think is contributing to this plateau in women's representation. Instead, we think that there are big boosts that you get from the number of years in politics. So Celia's work showed some similar sort of effects, with more years being a positive thing for respondents in these different samples. And then there's also effects based on the current occupation. So the grade 3 teacher gets the biggest penalty in the Global Legislator Survey. In the US Legislator Survey, there's a sort of teacher and corporate lawyer penalty, and also among voters. Voters are really, in the United States, really don't like corporate lawyers. And then we see these age effects too, where in general, people prefer candidates that are in the middle of their career, so 45 as opposed to 65. And this, I think, so these to me are indications that gender does matter, because these female pathways take women out of careers in education who are older, who have fewer children. Children is generally a positive thing. And those are the attributes that are penalized. So the main finding is that sex-based discrimination seems to work in women's favor. This is true in every grouping except for Republican voters. But that we think politicians, and also male politicians in particular, I'm not going to show you all of these results, favor certain career paths that women are less likely to have. So I'm just going to show you one final slide. This question of, well, is there really a teacher penalty? Celia and I were talking about this earlier. Here, we're looking at the moving from a teacher to different occupational categories, corporate lawyer, mayor, state legislator, for our different samples. And the main thing I want to tell you is that women get a boost from being basically anything except for a teacher, that in the samples where doesn't seem to be this teacher penalty is very small. There's a very small non-penalty for women in the USA legislator sample and in the USA voter sample. So we think that there is something going on with the occupation. Okay, so to conclude, why is there a teacher penalty? Is there a teacher penalty? So we want to do some follow-ups to try to figure out what it is. Is it a kind of cue of partisanship, as Celia's work might suggest, or is it because we think the teachers are less ambitious, or they don't have the right skill set? I would argue that dealing with third graders really does help you understand how to deal with a bunch of grown-up babies. But in any case, there are many follow-ups. But we think that the results that we have are sort of problematic for kind of getting past this 25% barrier, because these are the paths that women take to political office. Thank you.